that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
A large, hairy creature with arms that hang down beside its, bore down on its sides.
And I told him my name, and when I told him the name, he said he was called Code.
It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
You're listening to the Strangeology podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Foran, and this is your place to explore the weird, strange, and unexplained. From cryptids and creatures, the paranormal, aliens and UFOs, forbidden knowledge, ancient mysteries, conspiracies, and more. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Coming up on today's episode is a really interesting conversation about the mystery and history behind the story of the lost continent of Lemuria. There's a lot to it, and it's going to be a wild ride full of some stuff you've probably never heard about. Well, spring is here in New England anyway, although it's still not terribly warm. We survived the eclipse madness and just stayed home. I think the two highways that go through my state were bumper to bumper traffic until the early hours of the next morning. So I'm glad that even though we only got 15 seconds of totality, being on the very edge of it, it was quite an awesome experience. And we didn't have to also experience the traffic that goes with it. It's kind of one of those once in a lifetime things and just reminds you of our place in the cosmos. So I hope that a lot of you out there got to see it. It was a very, very cool experience. They're saying that the next eclipse to pass through the lower 48 here in the US isn't happening until 2045 or so. And that one is going to go from California to Florida. And I guess there's actually one in 2044, but I think that one's only coming through Alaska and down to Canada and Montana and North Dakota. Definitely glad I got to see it though. And maybe someday again, I'll get to see another one. But anyway, I hope that everyone out there has had a great week so far and that you have some fun weekend plans coming up. Also, I hope you've been enjoying the interviews I've been doing for this season of the show so far. I do plan on getting back to more research-based episodes soon, although I'm working on navigating and trying to integrate a more video-based approach to those episodes for my YouTube channel, just so it's something a little bit more interesting to look at for all y'all out there, besides just kind of a static image of the Strangeology logo. So we'll see how that all works out. And speaking of which, I actually just dropped a new long form video over on my YouTube channel all about the story of Organism 46B, which was super fun to make, and I hope you'll check that out. I'll have the links for that in the show notes. And just a couple quick reminders before I start here. Make sure to set your podcast apps to auto download so you never miss a new Strangeology episode. And also don't forget to follow me over on all of my social media accounts. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X or Twitter, Threads, and a few more places. But those are the main ones for content, additional content, updates, giveaways, and all that. Also, I want to give a warm welcome to the newest member of my Patreon, Eric. Thank you so much for joining. And if you're looking to support Strangeology and all the work that I do, you can become a member by heading over to patreon.com/Strangeology for as little as $1 a month. Higher tiers unlock more perks like early access and ad-free episodes, merch discounts, exclusive merch, voting power, bonus content, and a lot more. So if you want to join an ever-growing community of like-minded people who are into the strange and unexplained, it's a really great place to be. I appreciate the support and look forward to seeing you there. And a final reminder that next weekend, Friday, April 26th and Saturday, April 27th, I'm going to be at the International Cryptozoology Conference, which is being held at the Clarion Hotel Airport and Conference Center in Portland, Maine. On Friday, it's going to be a early VIP access to the vendor hall from 3 to 6 p.m. And afterwards, there's going to be a few other things like a meet and greet and a VIP dinner, which I was invited to. So that'll be fun. I know that Nate Brislin and Alex Petikoff are going to be there. Saturday is going to be the main event, which goes from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. There's going to be tons of vendors and speakers, of course, like Pat Spain, Gene Tewksbury, Chris Packard, and of course, the one and only Lauren Coleman. So it's going to be a great time, and I'll have my table set up in the vendor hall, slinging my merch. So come find me and say hi. The link for the tickets is going to be in the show notes if you are interested in attending. All right, that's about enough of that. Why don't we get into the episode? Today's guest is historian, archivist, and author Justin McHenry. Justin recently put out a book all about the story and the history behind Lemuria. And this is a conversation that led to a lot of places I didn't expect it to. There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of history. It's just super interesting. I think you're going to love this one. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Joining me today is Justin McHenry, who is a writer, historian, and archivist with a master's degree in history from West Virginia University. His writing has appeared in magazines such as Fate, along with various newspapers, journals, and online publications like Belt Mag, 100 Days of Appalachia, and also as an editor for stories as well, like The Garden at Rose Break. Justin has also just come out with a brand new book called Lemuria, a true story of a fake place, which I'm really excited to get into. So thank you so much for being here today, Justin. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Jeff, for having me. I'm excited to be on here and talk a little bit about lost continents and all the crazy stuff that goes on them.
Yes. There's so many stories around the world of this kind of thing. And Lemuria has always been a fascination for me. So I'm definitely ready to dive into the meat of what's going on with it. But before we start with that, West Virginia is that's where you got your degree from. It's certainly a place that's got a lot of history with all sorts of high strangeness, Fortean phenomena, as I'm sure you're aware. Are you from there originally, or did something out there call for you to go there?
I am born and raised West Virginia, and I'm still living here in West Virginia. So I was born in southern West Virginia, down around the Charleston area. Now I live in the Charlestown area by Harper's Ferry. So, and I have connections all over the state as well. Like my mom's family's from Wheeling, so in like the kind of Rust Belt area. My dad's family's from right smack dab in the middle in Gilmer County, so it's close to Flatwoods, where the Flatwoods Monsters at, and Braxton County Monster. And so I actually was busking one time in Point Pleasant, just playing with my friend on the street, like guitars and stuff like that. I know all about the weird stuff that goes on in this beautiful state.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's great to hear. West Virginia is a very interesting place. I've been there a couple times before, and hoping to get back there sometime soon, hopefully this year. We'll see.
Where have you been here?
I've been to Morgantown a couple of times.
No, that's good.
Been to Point Pleasant, just kind of passing through after doing an event in Kentucky. And it was kind of on the way back to New England, where I'm from. And I was like, well, I've been a fan of Mothman and all this stuff for I don't even know how long. So I've got to stop. It's like a rite of passage if you're into all sorts of weird stuff. And it was cool. And hopefully I'll get back there someday. And then I also I had stopped, or I'd driven through. I was kind of in a rush to get home, but I drove through the Sutton area on my way back from a conference, and I wanted to hit up the Flatwoods Monster Museum, but I was kind of on a timeline. I was trying to beat a storm back home, a winter storm, and so Yeah, it's a cool place, and but why don't we get into your book
Okay,
and
let's
the
do it.
history of Lemuria? What was your what sparked your original interest in this lost continent?
Well, I think like you, man, like living in this strange world and being around these strange things and just being interested in all of this weirdness. I picked up bits and pieces of the Lemurian story over the years, a little bit from, the Blavatsky side and what she had to say about it. I knew about the Shaver mysteries. Um, and so, and then and I think like most people during the pandemic, I was looking for, something to fill the time. And so I was like, let's write a book. And so knowing about all these different things, I kind of like was like, well, let's see if anybody's like connected the pieces too much. And no one has really connected all of the dots relating to the Lemurian story, and so that's what really piqued my interest. I was like, well, let's do this thing. Let's get on the crazy stuff that goes on in Lemuria, and so it was fun to yeah, very much like an onion. Like as soon as you start peeling away the layers, you start getting more and more in depth and into side tunnels into Lemuria and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely seems like there is a lot to the story. And there's, of course, a lot of ways to look at a story like Lemuria, or for that matter, a similar legend like Atlantis, like looking at the geology, the anthropology, spirituality, the occult. Like you mentioned, Madame Blavatsky, of course. I'm sure we'll talk about her in due time. What was your approach to the research for this, and how did you navigate between the line of looking at this with, you come from an academic background, and using that rigor, that field of study as a historian, and also kind of bringing in creative interpretation to it, to connect all these dots?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I was lucky because Lemuria has such a distinct beginning. Like it has a very like finite start, and so you don't have to go rooting around and too far back. You know where it starts, and it's just following the trail like from there on forward. Really made it like really simple for me. So it's just going along the chronology of it all and finding out how Lemuria kind of developed from, the land bridge into the occult of Lemuria, and then into just even beyond the occult into just pure weird Lemuria, on up to today. So it was, um, very, very easy. And also like it's been written about, piecemeal over time as well, especially with like the Shaver mysteries. And then you have the stuff going on at like Mount Shasta. And then of course Blavatsky's been written about a lot. So just just kind of connecting the dots between all of those different points in the
Yeah,
in the story.
gotcha. So for my listeners out there, Lemuria is said to be a lost continent, but what exactly is it, and what was the very beginning? How did this whole idea start? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So it was a 19th century ornithologist, so a dude that just studies birds. He was given a speech at the, I think, Royal Society or some scientific society in London, and he was um, talking about the mammals on Madagascar. He was just giving an overview of the mammals on Madagascar, and of course, the most famous mammal on Madagascar is the lemur. And so he gets into talking about lemurs and how lemurs are only found on Madagascar, and so he was talking about how there's lemur-like species in South America and in Africa. There's lemurs in Madagascar, and there's lemur-like species in elsewhere in like India and Asia. And so for him, like there had to be a connective tissue, a connective piece of land that connected everything. to account for all of the like animal migration, basically. And so at the very, very, very end of his thing, the very last line, the very last word of his speech that he was giving, he was like, and I shall call it Lemuria. I proposed the name Lemuria, and the name just stuck for this landmass that connected basically all of like South America on up to India. Um, and the name stuck, and it was um, such a useful like tool for science as well going forward from that. And so that kind of got scientists involved in the idea of Lemuria. And once the scientists got involved, they really kind of um, like made it more real in the minds of everybody else. And that's what kind of kicked off the whole Lemuria craze that was going on in like the late 19th century, I guess.
Interesting. Yeah. It kind of coincides with science's beginnings of understanding of even human migration and evolution and continental drift and how life had spread over Earth. That's pretty interesting for sure.
Oh, yeah. And Lemuria was right at the center of all of those debates that were going on all those topics that you were talking about. The guy who came up with the idea for continental drift theory, Alfred Wegener, he called the peeling off of India from the Africa supercontinent into and its collision into Asia. He called that the Lemurian compression. And then as part of that collision that, created the Himalayas because of the two tectonic plates, crashing into each other, that peeled off Madagascar. And then that's how it ended up where it was today. And so it's like the idea of Lemuria was very much in the minds of like serious scientists of their day.
That's super interesting. That is very interesting indeed. But we look at oceanographic, topographic maps of Earth, and there's not really anything in the Indian Ocean that would suggest that there's any kind of sunken continent. Maybe some islands, but that's about it. Yeah, it's definitely fascinating. Now, I guess there's there's a lot of legends that are behind this, and maybe we can start to get into some of those. From my understanding, in reading into this, it seemed like there was maybe some kind of a giant's connection that got thrown into this whole idea. Is that something that you can talk about at all?
Oh yeah, the giants. So like for whatever reason, giants have been associated with Lemurian and just large, extra large super humanoids as well. And so it really all started with Blavatsky and her root races and that whole theory. And so Lemuria for her was the third root race. That's where the spiritual forms of the first two root races started taking actual physical shape. And when they took physical shape on Lemuria in the third root race, they just turned into giants. And so they were, 50, 100 feet tall, like really super, like not even like giants. They're like, ultra giants. And so, yeah, and they were also like cyclops as well. And so they had one eye, and then that eye eventually kind of migrated across their foreheads and the pituitary gland, and be able to use that as telekinetic kind of powers as well. And so that's really got the idea started about giants on Lemuria. And then as the third root race evolved, like the giants gradually got smaller and smaller into where they became people sized in the fourth root race, which was Atlantis. But then going forward in that idea, you have someone like Richard Shaver, who is part of his whole mythology around his idea of Earth. So Earth was Lemuria to him was basically ancient Earth, like the like pre-dinosaur ancient Earth. And so we had these giant aliens coming down and living on Earth, and they were like 300, 400 feet tall giants. And then they became allergic to the sun, and so they had to dig under the ground into the earth to get away from the sun's you know harmful rays to them. And so to help in that process, they created these robots, which eventually became us humans. And they developed a bunch of ray technology, but so I am rambling. I feel like I'm
No, this is
rambling and like
great. This is
yeah,
great.
like I'm, but it's like I'm trying to tell Shaver's story in the most coherent way possible, and it's kind of hard to do just because of who he was and what his thoughts were. But the giant aliens, they were, it became too much for him here on Earth slash Lemuria, and so they hightailed it off the planet and left us humans here. And so um, the good humans, we went up to the top of the earth and kind of got used to the sun's harmful rays, but the bad humans stayed underground and became these evil dwarf-like creatures called Darrows that are kind of responsible for all of the world's ills, from everything from stealing your car keys to shooting Kennedy, basically. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
I was not, I've never looked into Shaver. As anytime I've ever looked into Lemuria, I'm not sure why that never came up, but that is really interesting. And especially, how that kind of idea parallels other theories. And I'm not sure if it was more of a seminal theory than something like, Hollow Earth, or the story of the Anunnaki from ancient Sumeria, but there's definitely a lot of similarities, it sounds with, the origin of humanity being like star seeds, and having this ancient alien type of vibe where we were created by another intelligence, and then they left because of whatever reason, or they tried to wipe us out. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that bit of history about that.
I will say, to add on to that, so the Shaver stories were written by Richard Shaver, but edited by Ray Palmer. And so Ray Palmer he was editing Amazing Stories at the time, but then he went on to create Fate and some other. He was really responsible for like the flying saucer craze in the 1947 and onward. He like hired Kenneth Arnold to research the Maury Island incident and all that kind of fun stuff. So he was deeply involved in it, but he was also deeply involved in the Hollow Earth and like spreading the idea of like Hollow Earth theories, and like later in the 1950s. And so it's very much like all kind of like congealing up right there in the Shaver mysteries.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. Now, how much of the story of Lemuria was influenced by, is there a connection between that and the Lost Continent? I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, but Kumari Kandam from Sri Lanka. Is there any connection to that?
Yeah, so that's the Tamil people's version of Lemuria. So they believe in a continent that was lost. They're kind of connected to it. If you look at like the drawings of Khmer Kundanaran, it basically is like a triangle descending down from the tip of India, including all of Sri Lanka, and then a big chunk of the Indian Ocean south of that. And so that's very much like deep within Tamil legends and beliefs and thought structure, and it's still very prevalent even. I don't know about today, but very recent in their past and in their beliefs. I know up until the 1960s and 70s, you would have leaders from southern India who were like professing like belief in these ideas too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back. Like with Atlantis, you mentioned there were a few different worlds. I'm assuming that was kind of a similar idea with like Hyperborea and all that stuff. What's kind of like as far as lost continents go, was there a big difference between, Atlantis or Lemuria, that you've found? Are they kind of similar, or are there very stark differences between the two?
Yeah, well, especially because Atlantis has kind of always been there. It's been there for, thousands upon thousands of years since Plato wrote about it in his dialogues. But it's just kind of like waned out of popularity for many hundreds of years. And then really starting around the time that Lemuria was being talked about in the late 19th century, you have a resurgence of Atlantis ideas coming out, especially through the publication of Ignatius Donnelly's book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And so that really kicked off this kind of like pairing of the two between Lemuria and Atlantis. And so, like going forward, you would have the you would have the chronology for the ideas would be, Lemurian came first. It was destroyed. The people from Lemuria went over to Atlantis or somehow influeed Atlantis, and then Atlantis was destroyed, and then, everything else happened after that. And so you have this like time frame going on where you have that kind of connection between the two worlds. Blavatsky kind of solidified it in her book, The Secret Doctrine, where she's talking about the root races with the third root race is being the Lemurians, the fourth root race or the Atlanteans. We are now the fifth root race, and the sixth root race is coming in America and all that kind of stuff. And then afterwards, after her, the second wave of Theosophists are kind of doing similar stuff. And then when you get to someone like James Churchward and his books on Mu, he's doing similar things. He's talking about the idea of there being an Atlantean civilization that was also part of this Mu civilization as well.
Now, Mu is in the Pacific Ocean,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And yeah, can you expand on that for a minute? Has your research led into anything about that alleged lost continent?
Oh yeah, well it's basically the same. So James Churchward, amazing fellow. He wrote like 5 or 6 books all on Mu, and he kind of went out of his way to never mention Lemuria in all of his books, even though by the time he was writing in the 1920s and the early 1930s, Lemuria had shifted. It had like kind of moved across the Indian Ocean into the Pacific Ocean, and it's really wherever people needed to be. So Blavatsky's Lemuria was in the Pacific Ocean. All of the second wave Theosophists like Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater and Rudolf Steiner, their Lemuria was in the Pacific Ocean. And so by the time he was writing, like Lemuria was kind of centered right there in the Pacific Ocean. And so Churchward's Mu, and every iteration and every idea was basically Lemuria, and but in name only. But even like in the name, Lemuria is Mu, so I'm not sure who he was fooling too. So
that's great. Now, did the idea of Lemuria kind of get resurrected by Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society, or did they kind of reinvigorate or popularize the idea in the mid late 1800s, or how did that kind of play out?
Oh man, she completely hijacked the idea of Lemuria.
Gotcha.
And so it was very interesting. And so to go back a little bit, there was this German evolutionist, Darwinist, guy by the name of Ernst Haeckel. And so he was writing right after On the Origin of Species came out by Charles Darwin. And so On the Origin of Species doesn't really get into human evolution all that much. And so Ernst Haeckel saw that opening, was like, okay, we need to discuss where humans came from. And so he wrote his book, The History of Creation, which was just like, for science books of its day, it was a hugely popular work that went through dozens of editions and multiple languages and all that stuff. And on that, he was like, we need to find a place for human evolution to to happen. We need this like paradise somewhere for it to happen. And so for him, that was Lemuria. And he literally drew a map with Lemuria on it. It was the first time Lemuria was ever drawn on a map, and he put it right there, smack dab in the Indian Ocean. And so for him, that's where primitive like apes evolved into humans, was on Lemuria. And then from Lemuria, because of its central location, then they, spread of human civilization, or, humanity and all the different races kind of happened from Lemuria. And so while he was writing, he was writing his books and they were coming out. Um, Blavatsky was writing her book, The Secret Doctrine. And so she was using Haeckel as a straw man for her spiritual evolution. So Haeckel was like physical, human evolution. Blavatsky was all about the spiritual evolution of humanity. And so you have these two opposing ideas, but really they weren't all that opposing, because she was utilizing a lot of what, like the inner workings of what he was talking about in his science behind evolution in her really dense book, the Secret Doctrine, and getting into the nitty gritty details of how, like, giant evolution takes place from spirit forms and all of that stuff, because she goes really, far into that. And so that's where you get this idea of a spiritual occult Lemuria happening. And it's just from that, it kind of just took off. And people, she kind of unleashed it from the natural world and set it free in a spiritual, weird world.
Yeah, for sure. Now, are there people that are, I'm sure there are people today that still kind of follow that, that whole idea, for sure. Are there, people out there who do ritual or any kind of thing to summon, say, like ancient Lemurian entities or anything like that you've run across?
I don't know about summoning, but there's a lot of people who want to find that connection with ancient Lemurians and all of that stuff. So it gets really caught up in like new age woo-woo kind of stuff, and finding their inner Lemurians and getting connected with them. And so you'll see like pictures with like, dolphins, magical dolphins, and that kind of stuff coming up. And then also Lemuria now is mostly known for crystals. So Lemurian seed crystals. And so it's very much a kind of popular with the whole crystal crowd, and getting a Lemurian seed crystal to kind of like be a spiritual, harness it for a spiritual power and all that kind of thing.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of, people that do past life regressions and stuff like that. Maybe they see something and they think they're a Lemurian princess or king or something like that.
Well,
I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, that's, I don't know if you know what Amy Carlson of The Love Has Won called, the documentary that just came out on HBO or Max late last year.
Was that the Mother God one?
Yeah, Mother God. Yep.
Okay, I started watching that and I hadn't finished it yet because life got crazy. But yeah.
But that's exactly her backstory. Like, this is part of like her story, is that she was once a Lemurian princess, or the Queen of Lemuria. And she was, also the ancient daughter of Donald Trump and all that kind of fun stuff. So, and you get a lot of that going forward, especially with the second wave of Theosophist. So Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater, they were doing that kind of, I forget what they called it, but they would project themselves back into the past, into other people, and then just write about it. And so they would do these. And they did that with Lemuria. They projected themselves back into Lemuria and just wrote down what they saw.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's when like Lemuria gets really crazy and weird too. When they go back in time.
We love the crazy and weird here for sure. Now we got to talk about Mount Shasta.
Okay.
What's the connection between Lemuria and Mount Shasta?
Okay, so it is kind of convoluted. I hope you don't mind
Oh,
the
by all
convolutiousness of
means.
it. Okay,
By
so
all means.
it kind of all starts with this boy named Frederick Spencer Oliver. So he was out. He was a teenager. He was 17. He was out surveying a piece of land near in Northern California, kind of near Mount Shasta, for his father. And as he was writing down some notes, the story goes, an entity started like taking over his hand and writing for him. So almost like automatic writing. And so he gets freaked out. He runs home. But the entity kept coming back to him day after day. And slowly he like the entity introduces himself to Frederick as Philos. And then Philos wants Frederick to write this book. He wants to basically channel through Frederick to write this book. And so he wrote the book, A Dweller on Two Planets. But sadly, it was never published in his lifetime. So he died in 1899 at the age of like 36, I believe. And then his mother would finally get the book published in 1905. But The Dweller on Two Planets tells the story of this Atlantean nobleman who it's kind of an exciting story just because it's an Atlantean nobleman who gets into a love triangle with two Atlantean women. The two Atlantean women get into a fight. One turns into a statue. The other, I think, kills herself. And then he flies around on a UFO or an airship. What's it? Shoot. One that flies, but also can be a submarine as well.
Transmedium.
Yeah,
Yeah.
transmedium ship. So yeah, so back in the 1880s, they were talking about transmedium ships.
Interesting.
So yeah, you have this Atlantean nobleman kind of brooding on his airship, but he dies. He gets reincarnated as Walter Pearson. He fights in the Civil War. Then he moves out to California. Gets rich in like the mining industry out there or whatever. But then he meets around Mount Shasta this mystical Chinese man who takes him within the belly of Mount Shasta. And then once in Mount Shasta, he meets all these kind of ascended masters, and they then beam him up like they astrally project him to Venus. And then once on Venus, he learns some like weird esoteric Christian ideas and stuff like that. And so that's that like second part of the book is where you get the idea of there's like weird stuff going on inside of Mount Shasta. And there's these mystical beings being inside there. And then like 20 years after that book gets published, you have the Rosicrucian organization, the ancient mystical order of the Rosicrucians, who was founded by a guy named Harvey Spencer Lewis. He writes a book called Lemuria, the Lost Continent of the Pacific, which was very influential in like the 1920s, 1930s, occult world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that talks all about how Lemuria, like California is the east coast of Lemuria. And so when Lemuria sunk into the Pacific Ocean, California was still left there. And all residents of Lemuria moved to Mount Shasta and moved within Mount Shasta. And so you have all of these stories about crazy parties going on at Mount Shasta. There's like force fields around like certain roads in Mount Shasta. You have Lemurians coming down to the towns around Mount Shasta, buying stuff and like just acting all weird and stuff like that. And so that's where the idea of Lemurians being in Mount Shasta that comes from.
Interesting. I know the story about, and the name's escaping me right now, but there's the whole legend of the guy back in that found a cave near Mount Shasta, and he hikes in there like 20 miles, which is impossible. And he goes in and he finds this lost city with all this ancient stuff in it, and there's mummies and everything. And then he sits on the story for 10, 15 years. And then gets a bunch of people in Stockton, California to gather up so they can do this big expedition. And then the night before they're supposed to all go, the guy just like vanishes or whatever. And it's just like, yeah, it's so interesting, people trying to, clearly there was, probably not anything there, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. The guy name was J.C. Brown or something along that. Yeah. Yeah. And so, he wanted like he ordered a glass bottom boat from Argentina to come up to carry everybody up to Mount Shasta to try to search for this lost gold that he sat on for decades.
Yeah. It is interesting though, because there are people even today that do, like you mentioned, people talking about Lemurians coming down from the mountain to do shopping and stuff like that. But there are, people that do report seeing UFOs and stuff around Mount Shasta.
Oh, yeah.
I think like, Stephen Greer from the big UFO guy.
Yeah.
And I think he does his CSETI thing out there where people go and they summon UFOs or alien entities out in the wilderness. Not sure how legit that all is, but yeah, there seems to be some kind of allure to that place, for sure. I mean, that whole part of the country, there's a vibe, I would say, for sure, to all that.
And I would say, like, going along with that, that whole story about from Henry Spencer Lewis, his book, that kind of kicked off this like golden age of weird Mount Shasta. And so you have a lot more people coming to the area, and then they are having experiences. You have people actually meeting Philos there and having Philos take them within the mountain and having stuff like that. You start having a lot of like bizarre little people encounters. So like kind of gnomish creatures, like that. You have kind of fun Bigfoot stories happening now around Mount Shasta, and you have a lot of UFOs encounters. And I would say also, you would probably appreciate this, just like the early Lemurian encounters mirror so much of like early contactee encounters that like Adamski had. Like this was the first, because the book was written in the late 1920s, and so like automobiles themselves haven't been around for too that long. And so this is when like the first time that I read where you have automobiles coming, seeing a white light and stalling out, and the engine stalling out, and things like that. And so you have like classic UFO tropes and stuff like that happening in the 1920s in Mount Shasta. So
yeah, wow, I'm gonna have to look into that more. That's super interesting, because obviously the first very well known, at least in North America, case like that was Betty and Barney Hill, and that wasn't until the 1960s. Although I recently did an episode about the Virginia incident, and also covered the Colares alien invasion attacks incident, which happened in the late 70s in Brazil as well. And during my research, I ran across stories of a guy who I think at the late 40s or early 50s in Brazil who got abducted by aliens, apparently. And, that whole story, that idea goes back a lot further than a lot of people think, which is super interesting to me, at least. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that.
No, and the early Lemurians looked exactly like the Adamski, like tall whites, and like the whole Nordic aliens that are kind of somewhat prevalent or in the lore these days. Yeah, for sure. What's your take on like the Hollow Earth connection to this? I know we briefly touched on it before, but do you think there's any kind of significant connection between that theory and Lemuria? Like Lemuria plays a part. It basically plays not a foundational part, but like in the 20th century, it's the most, I guess, prevalent occurrence of the hollow Earth theory that happens. Because in basically from like the Renaissance on forward, you have like the hollow Earth being a kind of a not an accepted idea, but it's one that gets bandied about pretty much. But then it kind of dies out, and then it gets picked back up a lot more, especially when you have ideas of Mount Shasta being hollowed out, and then you have Richard Shaver writing his stories and talking about the underground worlds and stuff like that. So that really helped further the idea of there being this hollow Earth going on.
Gotcha. Well, I'm curious. We've talked about a few weird things about Lemuria so far. What would you say are some of the weirdest ideas or theories that you ran across when writing your book?
Oh man. Okay. Let's see here. When you get to Uriel and the Unarius Academy, their ideas are really interesting and fun. And so they were taking place in the 1960s and early 1970s, very much like in the heyday of like New Age thinking. And so they're a group that would get together and do these kind of projections to other planets and other worlds. And so they very much believe in the whole Space Brothers ideology and Space Brothers coming down and settling on Earth and all that kind of stuff. And so for them, the Space Brothers are coming from Lemuria, and they have this whole convoluted backstory of one of their, I forget the one person's name, but he comes down here. He's like a Messiah-like figure. And then the other Space Brothers don't like that. They get jealous of him and they stab him in the back, and he dies.
Oh,
and so that's right. So that's their like Lemurian the story is this like kind of Julius Caesar assassination going on and by these Lemurians. So that's pretty fun and kooky to me. Other great stories, anything around Mount Shasta, I found was very, very interesting. And so there's these idea of this guy came across this group of little people, and they took him within Mount Shasta, of course, and they showed him these bell works, and they called themselves, they were bell makers. And they had this story where these bells were the heart of the earth, basically, where it's like as they were chiming and as they worked, that means the earth was living. And so once these bells go silent, then all of earth will like die and disappear and destroy itself.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that might have been like might have been the same person. There was a story around Mount Shasta was escaped Japanese internment prisoner. Like he escaped from whatever Japanese internment center he was in, and he was walking around Northern California in Mount Shasta, and he might have run across these like little people and who showed him these ideas about bells and everything else.
Yeah. And it's interesting that people are reporting that maybe they're aware of the was it Shaver that had the idea about the Darrow, the people who lived underground. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is that's a pretty interesting. And I know that Native American, First Nations tribes have a lot of stories about little people.
Okay.
Fae folk and stuff, all over the place, but definitely out in the West Coast area, Washington State, even all the way up to Alaska. Mm-hmm. I did an episode. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the Alaska Triangle, but there was this one story I came across of, I believe it was some hikers were out on this really remote river, and obviously there's not a lot of people per square mile in Alaska. It's bigger than Texas. And if you're out there, you're out there alone. And, who knows who could be out there? They could be hermits, but they were on the bank of a river, and on the other side, they saw this little guy wearing kind of a pointy hat, smoking a pipe, sitting on a log, and they observed him for like 10-15 minutes, and then he just got up and walked off into the woods. It's like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Something going on there. Mm-hmm. But that's a very interesting connection. And like in New England and even out towards the Midwest, there's legends of puckwudgies, which are like little gnomish, elfish, trollish type of entities that kind of look like porcupines sometimes, but definitely mess with people. If you look into the Wampanoag folklore about it, they used to help people. Sometimes they still do, but most of the time they're still pissed off at humanity because they decided to worship a different deity and they want their revenge, their sweet revenge. It's definitely interesting to hear that there's also a component of little people, which I always try to maybe not try, but associate with legends of the Fae folk, fairies, that whole world. And, it makes me think of, the interdimensionality of it all. And stuff like breakaway civilizations too, like what's really going on that we don't know a lot of stuff. And I try to remain healthily skeptical about a lot of this stuff. I have enjoyed the strange and unexplained. The woo, I definitely look at with a real sharp eye, but sometimes some things just make you wonder sometimes. Yeah. Was there anything I'm sorry if you had a thought.
I was just going to say, like, I never want to put down anybody's experiences or anything like that. Like if people are having those experiences, those are real to them. And it's just about what do you do with those other than just having those personal experiences too? There was one that you kicked off that reminded me. There was in Mount Shasta, there were these two ladies and a daughter living together. And then they just have these spirit forms, these 6-7 foot tall spirit forms show up in their house. Not physical beings whatsoever. And they called themselves Lemurians, and they just hung out there for a couple weeks, just like these just spirit guys just hanging out, trying to hook up with their daughter. And then when they said they wouldn't, and then when the daughter said she wouldn't go back to Lemuria with them, they disappeared. And so it was just very, very stuff like that is just so strange and so weird. It's almost too weird to be not true. I would say it's who would say such a thing, or who would come up with such a thing?
Yeah. That's definitely a strange one there. Yeah. Now, and perhaps this question, speaks to the sociology of it all, but this story has been around for 150, 200 years, maybe. Yeah. What do you think's the biggest draw for people today to still kind of believe in it and think that it was a thing? Because, we know that there wasn't a lost continent in the Indian Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is another story, which we can get to in a minute because of recent findings with, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, Zealandia. But it's why do you think people, kind of grasp onto this? Is it just an attraction to the unknown?
What I found through my research and just going through the different periods and the different ideas that people had about Lemuria was very much so that its attraction lay in its blankness. So people could make Lemuria into any and everything that they wanted it to be. And so I think that was very attractive to a lot of people. Um, and you see that throughout all the many iterations. And so people are just projecting what their interests are onto Lemuria, and that's Lemuria for them. And so just the ability to do that, and it being true too, because you can't like disprove that Lemuria wasn't home of giants and cyclops, or it wasn't home to a tribe of Jedi who move things with their mind and their educational system and all that kind of fun stuff. So I think that's the major power of a place like Lemuria, where it's so nebulous that you can make it into anything you want to.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely one of those things where you can have your own interpretation, blank canvas, connect it with things for sure.
Yeah.
And that makes it exciting. Definitely. And if someone hasn't yet, needs to make a movie about Lemuria.
It would be a fun place, man. It would be such a raucous, fun time. And unlike Atlantis, which maybe unfortunately for everybody after Plato, Plato gave specifics about Atlantis and gave specifics about all the stuff that was going on there. And so you don't really have that blank slate quality to Atlantis like you do with Lemuria. So it's a place where people with better imaginations go and can have their fun there.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the $64,000 question here is, do you think that Lemuria was ever a real place in any kind of capacity in history?
No.
Gotcha.
I don't think. It's also funny because it's like a I can subscribe to there being lost continents or lost pieces of land that sunk into the earth and stuff like that. But there was no place ever called Lemuria, just because Lemuria, just the name itself, was an invention of a 19th century, bird watcher. So you don't have there's no place called Lemuria in the ancient world, but there are places like Zealandia that did exist, and there's other continental chunks that were in the Indian Ocean that were there too. So they make and that's interesting in a natural history kind of world where okay, so maybe that is how lemurs got onto Madagascar or got off Madagascar and to India and stuff like that. But to the bizarre world, it's not so much exciting.
Right. Yeah. It was interesting to see headlines about a lost continent was actually found about Zealandia, which makes sense if you look at it, an oceanographic map. You see that there is a continental shelf that is underwater, and New Zealand is just the highlands and the mountains of that former continent, which for whatever geological process happened, it either sank down or the ocean levels rose, which during the last ice age, there's a lot of land that used to be exposed and was above sea level, which is an interesting implication in and of itself, because humanity tends to congregate near coastal areas and rivers, and because it's easier to live and to find food and resources and do trade and all that. There was they call it Doggerland in between the UK and mainland Europe. That was all. I think some people actually dredged up artifacts from the North Sea, which is super interesting. And also in Southeast Asia and in Indonesia, there was Sundaland, which I'm so curious about that area, because you've got some ancient civilizations there, like where Angkor Wat is in Cambodia, and like what was going on there. I'm sure it functioned as a huge land bridge for people to go down and populate Indonesia. Maybe the Aboriginal people 60, 70,000 years ago got to Australia that way a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely.
There's definitely a lot of implications for that, for sure. And, maybe there were some lost civilizations out there that we just don't know about that are underwater, like Atlantis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that reminds me, I read a book a long time ago called Vanished Kingdoms. I forget the guy's name, but he just talks about these kingdoms that went away in Great Britain. And not even that long ago. You're talking about, a couple of centuries ago. And it's same exact things that you were talking about, like dredging up these lands and finding these ancient civilizations that were once, populous and powerful and all that going away too. So, and then like maybe the remnants of those are what make it down through these centuries, and that's where we get these ideas of there being lost continents and lost ancient super civilizations going on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'm not sure if there was ever. There's the whole Silurian hypothesis. Are you familiar with that? Oh,
yes, a little bit. I would say a little bit,
and like out of place artifacts, people finding spark plugs and nanotechnology allegedly in ancient rock. It's like I'm not entirely sure if there were civilizations as advanced as us, but perhaps there was something that was more akin to like the late Renaissance to the Enlightenment era. Maybe there were people sailing boats around the planet. I mean, there were, I guess, the Polynesian people who sailed across the Pacific certainly did it. The Vikings were able to do it in the well before the age of exploration to get to North America. So, who knows? Maybe there was something out there. Yeah.
I read, I forget his name, Pellegrino's book on Atlantis. I don't know if that's the man's name, but he was talking about Minoan and Crete and how just advanced like civilization that was, and how like if it wasn't destroyed by the super earthquake that like kind of took out the entire island, that 2000, just think about 2000 years earlier, there would be like spaceship launches and toilets and stuff like that, because they had like running water there and all of that kind of like interesting ideas that were going on there, and just project that out a couple of thousand years, if that went on unabated, like what kind of technological advances could have happened earlier, but if they were destroyed by a natural disaster like what happened on Atlantis itself. So
Right. Yeah. Like the Antikythera mechanism was kind of like the first evidence of a kind of computational device that humanity ever invented. And that's like super, super old. And who knows where we would be if things didn't happen that were out of our control, like natural disasters, volcanoes and all that kind of stuff. The Santorini explosion that blew up the island in the sea. Is it the Aegean Sea? Yes, the Aegean Sea. Yeah. Which a lot of people think that's where Atlantis was, but then Plato described it out in beyond the Pillars of Hercules. So who knows? Yeah. I've always loved looking at Atlantis and theories about where it might be, like Antarctica, or was it in Southeast Asia? Was it in the Atlantic Ocean or the Azores? There's like a big idea right now that it was the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania somehow. Ooh, have you heard that theory?
I have not heard that. That's I like that idea though.
Yeah. So there's this this guy, Jimmy Corsetti, Bright Insight on YouTube. He talks about a lot of ancient Egypt stuff.
Okay.
And then a couple of years ago, he came up with this theory. I'm not sure if he was the one that came up with it, but he has several videos on it. And there's this structure in Mauritania called the Eye of the Sahara, the Rashat structure. And it was used as a kind of a waypoint for astronauts in space because it's so large, and for them to be like, okay, we're over Africa now. There's the Eye of the Sahara, because it's this 23 kilometer wide geological structure that has concentric circles. It's like 2, 3, 4 of them. And it's curiously similar to like the dimensions and the descriptions of how Plato described the capital city of Atlantis.
Okay, yeah.
And most people are like, yeah, there's nothing there. It's just desert. But it's interesting because there's also, if you zoom out far enough, you can see that there's kind of like striations, like there was like a massive flood at some point, and ideas that, you know, it's nowhere near, it's like way above sea level, but there's like a theory that maybe it used to be below sea level and geologic processes have raised up that area over the last 10,000 years, something like that. But it is super interesting. And I think there's a couple people, YouTubers, who have like tried to get out there. It's really difficult to get out there because
imagine so.
You're in, you know, a foreign country, and there's not really a reason to go out there, but some people have gone out there, and it's kind of just rocks and stuff. I think there are some structures, like ancient structures. We're talking several hundred years, maybe not thousands, but you know, it's a really compelling idea, and it's fun to look into. I'm not 100% sold that it was where Atlantis was, but there is things to consider. Like the Sahara Desert used to be a lot more green than it was not all that long ago. Like when ancient Egypt was in its heyday, you know, it wasn't all desert. They had rain, they had vegetation well beyond the Nile Valley. And, you know, who's to say there's not some crazy stuff buried out in the Sahara that we just don't know about, because no one's going out there to dig up sand. They're still digging up stuff in Egypt, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
And the way that just reminded me that the whole Atlantis story technically came from Egypt. Like,
yes.
The backstory behind it is what Salon goes to Egypt and learns from, you know, ancient masters there about the story of Atlantis. So yeah, it all kind of goes back to Egypt, doesn't it? It kind of does. And, well, it's really interesting how Egypt is the kind of heart of so many different like esoteric people's origin stories.
Yeah,
it's very much like influential with like the Blavatsky story, her backstory, the Rosicrucians, like the Christian Rosencreutz. Like he did the same thing Salon did. He went down to Egypt to learn from, you know, magical ancient healers down there, and so there's a lot of ancient learning going on there in Egypt.
Yeah. And just imagine the knowledge lost when the library at Alexandria burned, how much more we'd know about what was going on back then, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And just imagine like the text and the stories that were there, and like unknowns that could have existed within its walls.
Exactly. Well, I got to ask, what's next for you? Do you have any new projects, new books that you're working on after, you know, putting out this amazing book about Lemuria and its whole weird history?
Yeah, well, I am finishing up right now a book on colonial Philadelphia. So very much outside of the weird realm, but I hope to get back into writing about weird topics in the future. I like to look into maybe like magic use and the arts, and like how artists have utilized magic rituals in their artwork or producing their art in the future.
Oh, that would be super interesting. Yeah.
And
awesome.
so I do run a like Substack newsletter that kind of looks into weird history stuff too. So it's called Our Belated Past. So
Gotcha. Well, we're just at the top of the hour here, Justin. And this has been a super fun and fascinating conversation. Definitely happy to have learned a lot about the history of the whole Lemurian story. Can you tell my listeners out there, beyond your Substack, the best places to find you online, where they can pick up your book and all that?
Okay, yeah. So the book is Lemuria, A True Story of a Fake Place. You can find it anywhere you buy books. You can go bookshop.org. You can go Amazon, Google Play, wherever you buy books, it's available. And then, yeah, I'm on social media, mostly like Instagram and I guess Threads now. Justin Loves History there. And so I'll post weird stuff that I find and just love of history too there.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you again so much for joining me today. And we'll have you back on at some point in the future. This is super fun.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again to Justin for coming onto the show today. Definitely check out his website and his book. It's an awesome one. I'll have the links to that in the show notes. There is a lot of super interesting history behind the story of Lemuria, beyond it just being this fantastical, mythical place, and he did quite the comprehensive look at it. Real or not, definitely check that out. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone out there who checks out the Strangeology podcast. Those of you who download it, share it with your friends and family. You follow me on social media and any place else on the internet. It helps me out so much when you do that. The Strangeology podcast wouldn't be possible without the support of listeners like you. It's been an amazing 4 years plus so far of Strangeology, just over 3 years of doing the podcast. The show is listened to and heard in all corners of the world, something that I didn't think would be possible when I started all of this. So thank you so much for your continued support and listening to the show. And one more time, definitely make sure to give me a follow over on all of my social media accounts. Again, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, X, Threads. Most of my handles are at Strangeology or strange.ology. So if you're looking for more from me in long form, short form video content, random thoughts and all that, definitely check all that out. I do also run giveaways from time to time for my merch, so you'll want to check that out. To any advertisers or companies out there looking to collaborate with the Strangeology podcast, or would like to be considered for an interview on the show, if you are an author, a researcher, or someone who wants to share their story of something that they encountered, something unexplained. If you have those stories or want to collaborate, please send all business inquiries to info@strangeology.com. Also, before I forget, if you're looking for another way to support Strangeology, don't forget that I have merch on my Etsy shop. You can head over to strangeology.etsy.com and you'll find a ton of cryptid, alien, and Fortean gear available there. I'm always trying to add new designs as often as I can, especially with my busy schedule. So check back often. There's t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, which are a must for summer coming up. I also have hoodies and sweatshirts as well, and long sleeves. I've also got stickers, magnets, prints, mugs, tumblers, enamel pins, blankets, and there's more stuff I'm forgetting, but there's a whole lot of stuff to check out. There's something for everyone. So again, the link is strangeology.etsy.com. Thank you so much for your support. All right, that's all from me for now. I'm going to take a short break, and when I return, Justin was able to hang out for a little while longer to chat about some more details about Lemuria, along with some other curiosities as well for the Strangeology Beyond members portion of the show. You won't want to miss it. Members, stick with me, and for everyone else, until the next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and keep it strange. All right, welcome back, Strangeology members, to your portion of the show that is exclusive to you, Strangeology Beyond. Today's